we're going to start looking at a database. In this case, a SQL or SQL database. One of the most common open versions of the SQL database is MySQL. It usually runs on Ubuntu or some version of Linux, rather, or Unix. And it allows many users to store information in the database. It can be pulled and used in many different operations, and it's very common to find on an enterprise network. It's also very often misconfigured and very vulnerable. So we're going to look at what that would normally look like when you're come across an SQL server and how you would enumerate or gather information from it. So in our console, we'll look at our IP address. We'll take that same IP address and use the .3 of the subnet. And we see that we've got 3306, which usually ties to the MySQL service. We'll run a service scan on 3306, and it should go quite a bit quicker, but it does confirm it is a MySQL 5.5.62 running on Ubuntu. Now we can try a few different things. The first being, we'll run a MySQL command using the TAC-H for the host, our IP address, and then TAC-U for the username, and we'll go with root. Since it's running on Ubuntu, root tends to be the default admin. We'll see if we're able to log in. And it looks like it did take correctly, and we were able to log in. With that, we can now look at the databases with a show database. Requires a semicolon at the end. Otherwise, it just gives you a new line. So we have 11 rows in this set. So those are 11 databases. If we wanted to script it, we could dig into that. But now let's look at some information in one of these databases. Let's use books, include that semicolon at the end. And now we're looking in the books table for the database. And let's now dig into authors. So if we select count from all things, from authors, it should give us a count of all the options. So there's 10 in there. If you're curious what that looks like, we just wanted to see everything from the database. Select star for wildcard from authors. And now inside of the books database, there's authors, and there's all this information that goes with those authors. These are all just different tables in the database. What they're used for may or may not matter. In this case, it looks like it is for something nondescript. There's books, there's videos, there's a store, there's secrets and vendors. But mostly, we're trying to enumerate this thing. So, generally, you log in with the MySQL. You use a database, and then you can select items from that database. And if you ever need help, you just type help. And you get a whole list of what is in here, what options you have. Now, if you're not familiar with SQL, then it might be more useful to use some tools that we are more comfortable with, and leave the syntax up to those who created the tools. Our good friend Metasploit, we're going to use an auxiliary scanner. Very common with enumeration. And let's look at writable directories. Let's look at options. We'll pick a dir list. And we'll use this one right out of Metasploit. Metasploit data, word lists, and directory. And I use tab completion whenever possible. It prevents typos, especially if you hit tab and it goes all the way to the end, then you know you're good. We'll set G our hosts because we're going to keep using this one, and set G sets it as a global variable for this whole Metasploit session. We'll set verbose to false because it's going to tell us a lot of information, and this will just make life a little easier for us. If you're curious where verbose is, since it's not showing up here, it's in the advanced options. And verbose gives you detailed status messages. This is going to run a brute force of all the directories, testing things to see if they're writable. And if we have verbosity on, verbose, then we're going to get flooded with messages. Let's set a password to a null password. Double check that we have all the required items. Yes, 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 yes. And we'll run. It gave us quite a list. Went too far. For a lot of your enumeration, if you are able to output to a file and then look at that file, that can be quite useful. So it checked some common places. Came up with TMP is writable and root is writable. There's some error codes in here, but it looks like temp and root are the only writable directories. And that's on the system utilizing SQL. So it's kind of crazy that we get access to things that aren't necessarily about the database through the database. Another scanner that we can use is hashdump. So use auxiliary, scanner, MySQL, and hashdump. If we run options, our host is already set because it was set as a global variable. So when we changed our module from this writable dirs to hashdump, it kept it. We'll set a username to be root, since we already saw that that was vulnerable, and we'll set the password to be a null password. And even though in options it shows that it's empty, passing that empty value actually did give it something, ironically. Be elite, type exploit. And we get a whole bunch of hashes for different users. We'll add that to our list of things enumerated That can be quite useful later. And now we'll leave Metasploit and jump back into MySQL. So MySQL, tech H, our IP, and the user as root. And what we'll do is select, and then we'll load file, and see if we have access to files on the system. And we did that enumeration before, so we should have some access. And we do, we get the full Etsy shadow file. Not on the prettiest output, but we can see what users and services are currently existing on the system. We could use that to pull other files as well, especially if we have root access. But currently we're just enumerating and seeing what we do have the ability to find. We'll return to our good friend Nmap. In this case, we'll run a script. It'll be the MySQL empty password. Just see if there are any other accounts that can log in with an empty password. And it remains to be just root. If we had run this first, once we saw that we had MySQL, ran the empty password, we would have gotten that root, we would have gotten the empty password, and that's how we were able to do all the other scans that we've done so far. If we want more information on the database, we can run the MySQL info command. And this again gets us our version number. We can see that we've got this interactive client, which is going to allow us access to the system through MySQL, which is never good. That's something that they would want to fix in the configuration, but they left for us. Another thing we can look at is users. And for this, we need to pass some arguments. We will pass it a user of root and the password of null. And we see we do have root. We've also got UD admin, sysadmin, ultra, and there is a guest account on there. We would want to add all of these to our list. Another great command, if you didn't want to try logging in or weren't sure if you could log in, the databases with that same root and null password. We get those same databases that we found at the beginning. For more access, we could also look at MySQL variables. Since it's a database, knowing how to interact with it can be quite useful. What's most useful is the data directory. Where's all this being stored? Or where are all the variables being stored? This data directory of var lib MySQL that has its potential uses. After variables, let's run the MySQL audit, again with a null password, but also with an audit file name. So instead of MySQL user, we want MySQL audit.user. A lot of these scripts, you have to go into the script on your file to see what they want for arguments. Which initially can be a lot of work, but as you get a lot of this down and you create your own tool list, you'll just put all these commands into a file, and when you come across MySQL or an SQL database, you can just grab the commands you want, pop them in, and you already have it mostly built out for you. You can just change the things that you find. For example, maybe it's not root, maybe it's another user, so you run that initial nmap scan for any empty passwords, and then you can use that to do the rest of your enumeration. So all the rest of these scripts, you would just change that little part. The NSE lib is where a lot of this is kept. This one is quite a script, so double check that I wrote it right. MySQL audit. No tab completion here. There it is. In my variable name, I feel bad kind of showing you this, but it's normal to have typos and to mess things up every once in a while. And we can go through this whole audit. Something's passed, something's failed. As a developer, this would be a useful thing to run on your own system to see what shows up, if you've configured things correctly. And it does not grant privileges to non-admin users, so it passed the audit. So it would have to be an admin user to get privileges. I'll reuse this variables, script from earlier, replace variables with dump hashes. We used the Metasploit to dump hashes earlier. Change my variables again. Username is root. And password is empty. And we get the hashes for all of those. We can also use Nmap to run a query. When we logged into the database earlier, what we did is we ran a query. So this query is going to be, what do we actually want to ask it? So I'll replace that. So we'll do that select count of all the things, all of the rows, really, from books.authors with a semicolon and a single quote. And we'll use the username of root and password of empty. And we see that there are 10 items, 10 rows in that database. That's some basic enumeration from MySQL. It was a lot. Knowing these commands, having them written down somewhere can be quite helpful, because later when you come across something, then you'll want to use your tool set, your cheat sheet. Creating your own cheat sheet is helpful because it's what you're comfortable running. It's what you get used to, and if something changes, then you can adapt to that. Knowing what tools are out there gives you the option. If your tools aren't working, you can try something else. But when we're pen testing, when you're auditing your own system, or thinking like the attacker, if they're trying to find ways in, they're trying to enumerate your system, this is how you would go about it. MySQL, or just SQL databases in general, have the potential of being very vulnerable and allowing a lot of access to a machine without you knowing it. By default, they just have a lot that's vulnerable. So if you have these databases, you want to lock them down. And if you come across them, then you want to find out how vulnerable they are. And if you, as a pen tester or as the auditor, if there's anything that can be locked down on that.